Certainly for me, the most difficult part of writing A Thousand Splendid Suns was to suddenly try to live in the skin of a woman. I had really set myself up because I was writing a story not only from one but two different women's perspectives. And this novel took twice as long as The Kite Runner to write, even though by then I wasn't practicing medicine anymore. And I think the real reason for that was that I really struggled with the notion of being authentic to the female voice. And I kind of obsessed over it. It almost became crippling, where I would write and I would reread and convince myself that whoever read this would know that this is coming from a male writer. As with all solutions that I have found in writing, the solution is very simple. It just takes a long time to get to it. I decided that I would write these characters as people and not worry so much that they were women and that in some fashion maybe they lived in a different kind of emotional arena and that they experienced the world in a more unique way than men. I decided to write about them as people. I decided to get to know their core, their essence, their hopes, their dreams, their fears, what made them laugh, what they liked. And once I approached it that way, suddenly I found myself kind of evaporating from the pages. My own voice kind of dissipated, and suddenly these characters came to life, and these two women began to speak for themselves. And I no longer felt like the ventriloquist who was making the characters talk, but rather the other way around. I was then the mouthpiece for these characters. Mariam and Layla aren't necessarily based on people within my family or my circle of friends or people that I knew in my life, but rather they're based on a collective voice of women that I met and spoke to in Afghanistan, and not just women, but people. I was in Kabul in 2003, and I went there for very personal reasons, just to become reacquainted with the country, to reconnect after having been away for such a long time. I ended up speaking to people, and they would tell me their life stories. And Afghans on the street are incredibly generous with just sharing with them their experiences, what happened to them during the Soviet war, during the Civil War, during the Taliban. And I began to have a better understanding of what happened to women and how they particularly suffered through these last 20 years, particularly after the withdrawal of the Soviets, when there was really an outbreak of chaos and extremism in Afghanistan, and women were used as spoils of war when they lost their husbands and became widows, and they had to sustain families of 6, 7, 8 children, or they were not allowed to work or even appear in public places, where they were used, they were sold into marriage and sold abroad as sex slaves and so on and so forth. One of the intent with A Thousand Splendid Suns was to take that understanding, that insight, and to help breathe life and depth and emotional subtext into this very two-dimensional, iconic picture of the Afghan woman in a burqa walking down the street. And one of my intents with this book was to actually get underneath that and say, well, who is that person? What are their hopes? What are their dreams? How did they get to be sitting on that street corner with 6 kids and no husband? And that to me was, as a writer, was a very intriguing and riveting question. And that was the spark that got me to start writing the novel.